Hello. Thank you for coming tonight. This is, as many of you know, a part of our ongoing February Steampunk Festival in honor of creative writing at the Orange County campus turning 20 years old. As many of you know, we are 3 years old. And it seems like just yesterday. And so as a part of this festival honoring James P. Blaylock and Tim Powers, who've been there from the beginning, we are doing a night on a mysterious author named William Ashbless. Some of you have heard this name before. Some of you have no idea what you're in for tonight. And that's exciting to me. So I'm not going to go into too many details about who William Ashbless is, because that's what the night is all about. But I do have the wonderful pleasure of introducing Mr. John Berlyne, who flew in from England just, 2 days ago? And,
yes, I may fall asleep during this presentation.
Right. Literary agent, has worked with both my dad and Mr. Powers for a number of years now, and I'm going to let him sort of explain what exactly this night's all about. So, John Berlyne.
Thank you. Thanks very much, John. I am a publishing professional. I work as a literary agent in London. But I'm also an aficionado, which is basically a posh word for giant geek, of the works of James P. Blaylock and Tim Powers, and have been for some years. And to say I'm excited to be here to discuss the works of William Ashbless with you would be a very serious understatement. But we should just examine a little bit about who and what really Ashbless is. And to describe William Ashbless as an enigmatic character is to considerably understate the case. There seems in actual fact to be no end to the mysteries and bafflements that surround this man and his literary legacy. Ashbless, a native Virginian, arrived in London during the early part of the 19th century. But of his life before that, we have little more than hints. He was a poet of fair reputation, indeed a contemporary of no lesser figures than Byron and Coleridge, both of whom he was known to have associated with. Some of Ashbless's best-known works date from this period, among them The 12 Hours of the Night, Antlered Man Dangles, and the three London accounts of London philosophers, London madmen, and London scientists. However, unlike Byron and Coleridge, Ashbless did not leave much besides his poems to biographers. There are a couple of contemporary accounts of his life and works. James Bailey's Life of Ashbless, written in the 1830s, a remarkably vague and nebulous chronicle that, although it alludes to some notable points in Ashbless's life, it also manages to leave an awful lot out. And there is a frustratingly concise and rather crisp appraisal of Ashbless's works written in 1825 by William Hazlitt, but there is very little else. We can be certain of a few facts, though. It is largely due to the Bailey book that we know of the poet's presence in London, which began with his arrival in 1810. We also know that the year after this, Ashbless travelled to Egypt, though frustratingly we have no idea why he made this trip. That same year, 1811, we know that he married Elizabeth Jacqueline Tichy. And finally, we know that he died in April or May of 1846, and that his partially decomposed body was discovered with a single sword thrust to the belly on Woolwich Marshes. But what is fascinating about Ashbless is what we don't know about him. The extent, for example, with which he was involved in the business of the dancing ape madness that afflicted London in the 1800s has never really been fully established, and to this day remains the focus of much conjecture. And there remain yet further twists to the William Ashbless tale. A man fitting a similar description of the deceased poet was known to be living here in California during the mid-part of the last century. He called himself William Ashbless and was also a poet. An investigation into this second Ashbless character throws up a number of coincidences that might tempt one to almost believe that he were the same character as his namesake, were it not for the fact that this, of course, is completely impossible. It is strange, though, that history records that this William Ashbless, too, met with a mysterious end, apparently going missing in the mid-60s after some rather strange and never fully explained occurrences that took place here in Southern California. Though probably unconnected, it was also worth mentioning that the noted Ashbless scholar, Brendan Doyle, also disappeared in mysterious circumstances in 1983, thus inadvertently and ironically adding to the mystery surrounding his pet subject. Ashbless conspiracy theorists, of which there are many, have in even more recent years been able to indulge their suspicions of something funny going on. Occasionally, certain writings purportedly penned by someone calling himself William Ashbless, this time apparently a resident of Long Beach, California, have continued to appear throughout the last 3 decades. Printed usually in limited small press publications, these articles, which are sometimes no more than a signature, have more often than not served as commentaries or introductions to works by or connected with these two writers, James P. Blaylock and Tim Powers. These often acerbic Ashbless pieces have not always been complimentary. Never, in fact. And perhaps this is the reason why, when questioned about their association with Ashbless, both authors have hitherto remained very tight-lipped. I therefore am delighted to have this very special evening and occasion they've agreed to appear here and perhaps spill the beans on who and what exactly William Ashbless is to them. So I'm going to sit down now and perhaps gentlemen will be able to tell us exactly what the story is.
Well, Tim and I both attended Cal State Fullerton back in the 1970s, and we had a certain amount of time to waste, which I'm ashamed to say. I know that all you students in this class will not be wasting any time when you're at the university, putting your time to better use than what ours do, but
we seldom went to classes. There was a tree we would all sit under all day instead of going to classes.
But at that time, there were no attendance requirements.
I've never seen so many shades of brown. Amazing.
So Cal State Fullerton had a newspaper called the Daily Titan, which is still in publication. And back in those days, in the 70s, they published poetry. And some of the poetry just wasn't as good as you might guess.
That's charitable.
Well, yeah, some of it was pretty bad. And so one morning, we were sitting around eating eggs and bacon in the Commons, and Tim said, "We can write worse poetry than this." And I said, "Yeah, why not?" You know. And so he pulled out a piece of paper and wrote a line on it, and he handed it to me, and I wrote a line on it, and I handed it back, and pretty soon we had a poem. And it sounded very erudite because it was full of literary allusions, and
line by line,
pretty good.
it was good stuff. Altogether, it didn't make any sense.
We kind of had a tacit agreement that if the poem began to make sense, we would change it. So that whereas readers would think it was very erudite and very literary, it could not be analyzed, if that makes sense. Oh, people tried.
I remember one line was, "Heavy on my brow sits the cold dog of the snows," which strikes me as portentous.
Yeah. It also was a ridiculous image.
Yeah.
Which was the value. So you want to go ahead and carry on?
Well, so we wrote a pile of this stuff and typed it up and sent it to the school paper. And I said, well, we need a name. We need a pen name. And I said, it should be one of those 2-word names like Wordsworth or Longfellow. So I said, let's each think up a syllable. And so one of us thought of ash and the other thought of bless. And it seemed that ash bless worked better than bless ash. And we sent it in and they accepted it. They accepted there's a lot of poetry. And so we thought, let's do some worse. And so we wrote some that was stupider. And they accepted that. And we thought, great, let's do more. So we wrote a third lot that was stupider yet. And they did not accept that. But by that time, we had kind of got fond of William Ashbless.
And when we submitted the poetry to the newspaper, we sneaked in when nobody was in the office, and we left a note saying that, from William Ashbless, saying that he was monumentally horrible looking, couldn't go out into public, and so Tim Powers and Jim Blaylock were going to be his emissaries, etc. And they believed it.
In fact, in those days, being very young, we used to go to poetry readings, and we would bring Ashbless poetry along, and we'd say, now this is by our friend William Ashbless, who's too deformed and disfigured to appear in public. But he entrusted us with these poems he worked very hard on. And we'd start reading it, and there had been a lot of beer and pizza, and so we'd start laughing in the middle of reading the Ashbless poems, and everybody thought this was so insensitive. Laughing at these poems written by our grossly disfigured friend.
And then the funny thing is, it's shameful for me to say this, but
It's all
nobody
shameful.
caught on. Our favorite professor was a small Irish woman who was shockingly intelligent. She gave me my first C I'd ever gotten on a paper, and the comment on the top of the paper was, "You should." She said, "Apparently you think you're funny," which I thought was the most hilarious thing I'd ever seen. And she said, "Why don't you bring you and your sense of humor and maybe some creative writing, which I imagine you do, for the Poetry Society." So that's when I started going. Tim had already been there. But when we were reading this poetry, after the first poem was read aloud, she happened to catch my eye, and she mouthed, "You should be ashamed of it." Because she didn't for a second misunderstand what this poetry was.
Right.
But she never added a sound.
No, it's true.
She just put up with it. I thought, man, she was a saint.
And so ever since, Ashbless has been kind of a good luck token. Like in every one of my novels, I've somehow made a reference to
We're
it.
going to come back to that.
Oh, okay.
We're going to come back to that. What I want to do is, as you can see, this is actually the very first
Oh, that's the original?
Ashbless poem that they wrote. And we also have here, courtesy of John Vieira on the front row, this is an original Ashbless poem. And we're going to just hand it round and let you guys have a look at it.
Please be gentle.
And it's a genuinely it's a historical document. It's in a plastic thing, so I'm going to ask you just to be very careful with it. But we really love you to have a look at it. So you take your time having a look. It's a revered document. But enjoy.
I do apologize to everybody for occupying your time with this less than momentous literary business.
So we also have we have a few handwritten ones, but here you will see.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Appearance, first appearance print of William Ashbless. All
Suitably mounted, I know.
Just
What was the reaction to this poetry from people that were encountering it who weren't in as a joke?
You know, no complaints whatsoever.
There's certainly no complaints. I don't recall any reactions at all.
Okay, I think worse. So we've got another one here.
Yeah.
Famous, the Desolation.
Desolation of the Sphinx.
Yeah.
The titles are good.
Yeah, they're ridiculous. Yeah, and then the third batch that we sent in kind of blew the lid off the whole thing.
Yeah, so
What do you mean? Did they?
Well, we had a poem that was a mashup of Old MacDonald's Farm and T.S. Eliot poem.
and wasn't it the Red Wheelbarrow?
Oh, there was that too. Carlos Williams.
Yeah. Nut.
Yeah, and it had in there what the pig said and what.
Yeah, it was all free of value and worth.
Yeah. The last one was stunningly free of
So this is Ashbless in his infancy, if you like, your students having a laugh with at the expense of bad poetry, basically. So by the early 80s, both of you are working to pursue careers as professional writers, as well as academic careers. And it seems that Ashbless came along for the ride where this was concerned. He's no longer an in-joke in the classroom, but en route to becoming something a little more substantial. And we start to see some kind of interesting ephemera emerge at this time. So can you tell us the story behind it? There's a little bit of the story there. Tim, can you expand on this a little bit for us?
That was Ashbless's 10th birthday in 1982. We decided to have a party, and my wife worked at a sort of wedding preparation store where they made coasters and whatnot, and matchbooks. And so she made up a batch of Ashbless matchbooks, and I made a batch of Ashbless curry powder.
I'm going to show that, but we're going to come to you. You'll see the curry powder.
And I did Dean Koontz, Paul Anderson, all kinds of science fiction.
There you go. Number one and 20.
And it was actually very good curry powder. Turmeric, cardamom, cumin, which I ground up in a blender, and it stained the glass yellow. It's yellow to this day. And one time I was, not long after that, talking to Dean Koontz on the phone, and suddenly he just started choking and spitting. He said, "I accidentally opened your curry powder and spilled it all over myself." And he wasn't able to breathe. It was such good stuff.
And who was at the party?
He was at the party. And I think, what are you climbing around with the bottle for when you're on the phone?
He did stand on the table and recite a poem.
Is that why you wrote the book? Because you had your curry powder.
So you got novels in the works by this time, even though Ashbless is clearly taking on a life of his own here. And you both sold your novels, your first novels, around the same kind of time. We're sort of moving a little bit further. You've both got some novels under your belt, but we start to have an Ashbless incident where novel submissions are concerned. You're both going to the same editor?
Right. I wrote a book called Anubis Gates, in which I wanted to have a crazy bearded poet. And so I just used the name William Ashbless. And I sold it to Ace Books. And then Blaylock sent Digging Leviathan to the same editor at that publishing house. And Blaylock had used William Ashbless in his 1960 incarnation. And she wrote to Blaylock and said, "Do you two know each other? How come you have the same character, and how come in one book he's in 1810, and in the other book he's in 1960? And I believe you said...
Yeah, I said, I'll change the name of my poet. I don't confuse the issue. I just stick that in there because it's the, wild bearded poet who looks kind of like that.
Yeah.
Like that, And then she said, no, that's the same guy. And she said there's all kinds of internal evidence that it's the same guy.
Yes, just work it out.
And I thought, yeah, it might be the same guy. So it turned out to be the same guy.
Yeah.
Lost in time.
I actually was in touch with the editor just to find out if this was true. As she said, I finished with Anubis Gates and was working on the Digging Leviathan when I stumbled over William Ashbless again. Since I thought that Tim had made him up for Anubis Gates, I was startled. I asked Jim if he had Tim's permission to use the character. Both Tim and Jim told me that William Ashbless was real. I looked him up, and surprise, surprise, not real. Amusement ensued. They were both very convincing about Ashbless. They attempted to keep me going about his reality, but not for long. Quickly, they let me in on the joke, sent me copies of the Ashbless poems they published, and kept it secret till they revealed the truth elsewhere, but that was quite a few years later. And there's, this is official Ashbless from the handwritten notes of the Anubis Gates, which I'm guessing you had to familiarise yourself with to some extent.
Yeah, later,
yeah. And here is Digging Leviathan with some cool artwork. I find you probably haven't seen this before. These are Jim Gurney's original sketches for the and an alternative cover.
I've never seen those.
Yeah, I just thought they were cool when I was slightly shown because they were cool when I was looking. So did you guys have to convert in order to make the character consistent? Was there any discussion in between you? Was there any care taken?
Well, you figure he somehow lived from 1846 to when Blaylock picked him up, and he could. We didn't really specify.
He didn't disappear under mysterious circumstances.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, in some of these small chapbooks, we've written 3 of these, like the Ashbless cookbook there, and in each of them we say Ashbless appears to have died.
I'm going to come to that as well.
Oh, you're going to get to that?
Yeah. I'm very thorough.
Ah.
Did you ever kind of work out where he'd been in the intervening time?
I kind of always had it in my mind that he had access to a time machine.
Okay,
He used
cool.
to zip up into Long Beach and, landed near the pike, and, there he was.
I think that's as good an explanation as any other design.
I never heard that before, but it's not
Okay, so novels are out. Ashbless is basically established as a character. There's a common history. Clearly, there's a link between the 2 characters. And we start to see Ashbless really take on a kind of meta-reality because we start seeing things like this only a year or 2 later, actually. Tell us a little bit about the complete 12 Hours of the Night.
Well, that was put together by George and Jan O'Neill, who ran Cheap Street Press. And they said, we want to convince everybody that Ashbless, we want to make, I think apparently taking Ashbless as real. Could you guys write a brief bit of verse and we'll claim it's excerpt from the bicentennial edition of Ashbless's supposed long work, 12 Hours of the Night. So we, at Long Gone Bar in Long Beach called Joe Joe's, over a few pitchers of beer, wrote that bit of verse. And they published it. You see it's published by the IWAS, like I was, the International William Ashbless Society. And they published it, and they were real pleased, except at a convention, naturally enough, Blaylock and I mentioned that we had made him up in whatever the hell we did. And they got real mad, said we had spoiled the joke, and that they expected us to maintain outwardly that Ashbless was a real poet, and they never spoke to us again.
No. But, we assumed that they knew that we've been signing William Ashbless signatures all this time. We had no idea. They thought it was that nobody had any idea.
Not to be unkind, but they turned out to be crazy.
And there's an acrostic down the left.
Yeah, there's an acrostic. It says, there's a Robert Heinlein time travel story in which a key line is, "You're right in the groove, kid." It's this guy having gone back in time, calling his younger self on the phone. So I figured, let's make an acrostic that says, the first letter say, "You're right in the groove, kid." But I unfortunately mentioned it to them, and they said, "Oh, cool, let's do those first letters in boldface and separated from the rest of the way." No, don't rub people's nose in it. It's just a little. They said, no, well, at least so they've got it all in boldface so that you won't miss this idiot reference.
Now, they finished this around the time of the World Fantasy Convention in 1987 in Providence, Rhode Island. And they sent us 100 copies of this and said, why don't you guys split 50 of them and take the rest of the 50 and like go into the cafeteria and the bar and stuff, just lay them on tables and then blow everybody's mind. Everybody's just they're gonna freak out. And so we said, sure, we'll do that. And we pitched a few around when the place was empty. And later on we came back and virtually all of them were in the trash can.
Yeah.
Nobody picked them up. Whoever cleaned the tables came through and just dumped them.
Yeah.
So then we ended up with probably 80 of them, which was good.
They do sell for
big collector's items and very scarce.
Yeah, I saw one the other day advertised for Turning Figures catalog for $300.
Yeah.
What about this?
Which I knew where mine were.
What about this thing?
That was put together by a guy named Phil Garland, who was an old friend, so we let him, even though he hadn't asked any permission. He made up an Ashbless poem in it, the text of which was "Ho, ho, ho," in its entirety. And
Right, that's one of the better Ashbless poems.
to vindicate it, I wrote "ho," Blaylock wrote "ho," and I wrote "ho" after. But it's one of those ephemeral items that totally deserves to be ephemeral.
We'll move on then.
Neat picture.
And then we start this other stuff. So every year or two, he's coming out with stuff. We've got this 1989 is a convention called the Congo, in which there was a William Ashbless piece, which was fairly libelous, I would say, more than rude. I'm going to read a little excerpt of it. He says, "Nothing except money could have induced me to write." This is one about you, actually, Jim, in the 1992. There's nothing except money could have induced me to write this piece on James Blaylock. Did you know that the last 122 pages of his novel, Land of Coins, or whatever it's called, are entirely blank? But no one on Earth has discovered it yet because no one has ever been able to read that far in it. Sad but true. They can sue me if I'm lying. And one more thing. His first two books, the Elf and Dwarf books, were obviously written by someone other than Blaylock. Go ahead and read them. I'm not telling you who wrote them because the poor man lies near death now, bless his soul, and needs peace more than justice. I will tell you that Blaylock found these two books in an old trunk stolen from this particular gentleman's house back in '78 and passed them off as his own, and the whole thing, from my point of view, is a dirty, stinking shame. So he doesn't like you, either of you, very much.
I don't know. He's always really rude to us. In that first one, I was a guest at a convention and he wrote a bio note about me and again said that I too had ripped off my novels. I hadn't written them myself. And he said Powers recently had to get rid of his car because he drove it over the center divider of Harbor Boulevard and drove it home on the rims. He said, let him deny it. And of course, Blaylock and I wrote it. But several people at the convention told me, did you read what this guy wrote about you? He said you're driving drunk on flat tires and wrecking your cars. I said, yeah, I catch up. I did, though, in fact, blow out 2 tires driving over the center divider of Harbor Boulevard.
So you're completely right then. We get to the 2000s and we start seeing some stuff from a small press publisher called Subterranean Press. Tell us a little bit about On Pirates. This is a very fancy production.
It is.
You can see there were a number of different editions of it, each one fancier than the next, expensive bindings and slipcases and special poetry portfolios. Tell us a little bit about that.
Total fraud. We said in the introduction that Ashbless was apparently dead. His car had been found at the beach, footsteps leading to the ocean. He apparently had committed suicide. And in his honor, we had collected a poem and a story he had written and wanted to publish them as a bit of a memorial for him. And we said, being professional writers ourselves, we've fixed up some of the awkwardnesses of his writing. And there's an afterword to the book where Ashbless says, I'm not dead.
In fact, it's entitled Those Two Liars.
Those Two Liars. He says, I am not dead. They wrecked my writing by their stupid fix-up, and they stole all my furniture while I was out of town.
And there's a squid label, isn't there, in this...
Oh, that did have a squid label.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, it's odd. No one knows why, but there is a squid label in there.
Yeah, it's a long paper label that was supposed to be on a can of squid.
Somehow you got a whole pile of
Yeah,
them.
I got a pile of them at an antique store. I didn't know what to do with them. I mean, what do you do with them? And so we thought, well, we'll use those as the signature pages,
Yeah.
which was kind of fascinating. I never did get the fancy one. I was never sent my copy of it. So it's one of the few Blaylock books that I don't own. And then I think...
Is that mine?
Oh,
And
right.
he said at the end that he had already beat Powers up, and he was on the trail of Blaylock to beat him up too.
He was always beating me up.
And some more stuff here. Ashbless Memorial Cookbook.
Again, it seemed that Ashbless had died, and so the previous time, of course, he had not. But it seemed that this time he had died, and so once again, we, in his honor, collected his favorite recipes and organized them in a book. And I don't know if we touched them up. We added some of our own, I think.
We did a few of our own.
And in the afterward, he turns out not to be dead. He's real mad that we wrecked his recipes, and he beat us up again.
There's some good ones in the suppressed recipes, which you only got if you paid a great deal of money for the fancy copy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ashbless says, the response begins, "I'm not dead, let's get that straight." And then predictably goes on to threaten legal action. And the recipes in the cookbook include the Ashbless ragu, chicken a la Ashbless, et tuna brute.
They're actually
It's a
two.
great site. Are these real? These are real recipes.
These are good. We have good ones. We've both done it. In fact, for the Ashbless ragu, which is basically tomato meat sauce, I say if you want to make it exactly the way Ashbless did, get a couple spoonsful of Dunhill cigarette ash. Because he was always hanging over the pot smoking, and a lot of cigarette ash would fall into
It's the
the...
authentic taste.
Yeah, so if you want to make it perfect,
The suppressed recipes include stuffed canary flambe, crisped hippopotamus flanks, and a recipe, very intriguing recipe called Freud's trouser haggis, which involved mixing the edible ingredients together, stuffing them into the trousers, inflating said trousers with an air hose, and roasting the whole lot until the seams burst and the haggis is caught in a dish. This was apparently, again, according to what it says in there, tested by Blaylock and Powers, who found it inedible. Our only deviation was that we were forced to use a pair of Ashbless's own trousers, which of course might have invalidated the whole process. So, don't try this at home. Pilot Light, which is there's a copy of Pilot Light, have a look at it later on. A very pretty little production, and completely and utterly bonkers.
I feel like that was fraud. Again, Ashbless seemed to have died, and in his honor, we once again found a story of his unpublished, and we, being professional writers, touched it up for him and published it. And again, it turned out he wasn't dead, and he denounced us for having wrecked his story, and he beat us up again.
So there's a pattern emerging here.
I want to do a lot of those. He constantly turns out not to be dead.
But Ashbless has been actually quiet since 2009. His most recent appearance was in this book here, which is a bibliography of Tim's works.
It is absolutely a gorgeous book.
Is it? It's all right. And it continues again, a well-established pattern. This time, far from claiming that Ashbless is dead, Blaylock comes clean, writing an article called A Refutation, which he says, Ashbless is quite simply a poetic mystification that Powers and I first played off on various groups of gullible students when we were at university many years ago. We wrote some verses that were meant to be deceptively bad, and we passed that off as the work of William Ashbless.
How dare you! How dare you! How dare all you! What is this? Is this supposed to be me? Unbelievable!
This is celebrating you.
Oh, okay, how dare you! I don't want to hear it for a line, get out of turn to talk now. Take your chair with you.
I hope you're sober.
Calm down, Powers. I came with a purpose. A Refutation of a Reputation by William Ashbless. There's a craven variety of ugly sand dab that's overfond of the word lawsuit and can't seem to leave it out of his conversation as if he's all the time squinting around for some reason to prosecute one. I won't say that I'm talking about Blaylock and Powers when I point that out, because if I did, they'd immediately do just like I said and prove me right. And I'd have another lawyer beat the daylights out of. But I will say that they protest a little bit too much, like the woman in that Shakespeare play said. And that it doesn't take a dead flatfish to know that what they said about me stinks on ice. Blaylock says I'm a figment. He might as well said a fig. I might as well say he's a figment. Certainly his lies are transparent, but I'm not going to take that line of reasoning. Let Blaylock deny Ashbless. Ashbless won't deny Blaylock. Blaylock once denied China, by the way, because he said he'd never seen it with his own eyes. That's the sort of thing we're up against here. Defective peepers. Blaylock says that it's he and Powers that they wrote my poetry, but I say I wrote my poetry just like I ate my breakfast this morning. No doubt if you ask them, they claim to have eaten my breakfast. One time, they did eat my breakfast. Dirty kids. Down at Egg Haven, Long Beach, went outside for a smoke, bolted out the alley door, left me with a damn check. Why is it that Blaylock and Powers have claimed I'm dead no fewer than 4 times? There's no figment on record that's died so often, nor one that's written so much poetry. Most self-respecting figments don't bother to die at all. The two of them held a funeral at Fairhaven Memorial Park and left a grave behind with a coffin in it. Who's the damn coffin if it isn't me?
Sorry. Look,
Yes, I did bring some poetry to read. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Take a seat, Berlyne. Talked enough tonight. Autumn songs. The horse flies who dress you each morning with their faceted eyes and their gauze gray wings are hunchback with horror. Bare trimmings of the withering elm branch watch as the ocean asks sadly what time it is. While you, through the window of unbroken pane, gesture helplessly at the gardener who is eating the ivy vines. On the pasture without or within, smooth white calves loll drowsily by, and high among the topmost branches of your room I shudder, and I groan, and I die. It's the end of the poem. You can clap now. I've said my piece. But before I go, Blaylock Powers only $50 each.
Blaylock will cover mine.
Okay, I'll set it for 25.
well, how do you follow that? The next bit I was going to ask you was entitled Ashbless outside of your control. And I think we've just experienced perhaps the pinnacle of that. Now, are you aware that other people have kind of dipped into a bit of Ashbless? Here he is. He's on the Doctor Who wiki, and actually features in this Doctor Who novel.
Really?
Yeah. Just a little bit. It's only a brief mention, but it's kind of interesting how it's gone beyond what you guys thought up in the first place.
Yeah.
There's also an appearance in this book by Stephen Bruston and McFall, which again has a book of Ashbless poetry as a kind of MacGuffin type thing. So, any thoughts about that? I'm sure, by the way, there are a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah, it's not fan fiction, but he's out there and he's got a life of his own, this guy.
Yeah, I think Planet Ashbless wasn't here to be demanding money.
Yes, no doubt. This is a joke from the 1973 classroom
Yeah.
that has become things that other people put into their books now.
I think Ashbless's Wikipedia article is longer than either of ours. And I was thinking there's, somebody has taken the name, like Elaine Ashbless, and writes erotica novels. It does seem like they ought to ask permission at least.
Ashbless erotica sounds terrifying. Here he is, in a portrait by an artist called David
Oh, yeah.
This is from a very fancy edition of the Anubis Gates. And, you know, born when and died when, we simply don't know, and I'm not really sure we've answered that question this evening. Does anybody have any questions to ask that we maybe haven't covered? Is anybody, you know, I have a question actually that I've just thought of, which is, what now for Ashbless? Is there more life in this creature?
Well, I always use his name in every book just because I think it'd be bad luck at this point if I did not. I'll have a bit of poetry that I'll ascribe to him, or somebody mention a book, but I don't want to keep saying Ashbless all the time, or readers would say, well, Powers doing his Ashbless thing, like, you know, Alfred Hitchcock always getting on a bus in the background in his movies. So I've been translating it. So it's Guillermo Ceniza Bendiga, which I think means William Ashbless. Or Wilhelm Asche Signen, which again may be digging through a journey with a dictionary.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to keep doing that so that the reader won't snag on it, but at least I know I've touched the good luck charm.
And presumably there's still more of that original stuff to uncover that's never seen the light of day? Because you guys churned quite a few things out, seems to me.
He was very prolific, yeah. Any excuse not to do what we were supposed to do.
It's just a work displacement therapy for the team.
I remember one time he wrote 49 poems in one afternoon. All based on the number 7. There's the 7 continents.
Oh yeah, 7 continents,
the
the 7
Santini brothers.
7 organs.
Yeah.
Yeah. A whole bunch of stuff based on one ultimately trivial fact.
Well, I think read by the right person it can sound quite profound and important. We've just discovered. Does anybody have any questions? Because we've kind of, Vicky, you have a question.
They should comment on how they used to write in our dining room around our table. That's kind of interesting.
That's true. In fact, when we were doing like the 7 continents or the 7 organs or the 7 stages of the soul, we'd have a number of them going.
Yeah.
Not just one passing back and forth.
Yeah, you put them right next to each other all the way around the dining room, and then you could just follow each other around. It's sort of the Henry Ford method of writing books.
and yeah, that's right, exactly. And then when you get toward the bottom of the page, you begin to bring it to an end so that you can end with a period at the bottom of the page. And usually something kind of transcend it.
Anybody else have any questions at all for our two esteemed writers? Yes?
Are we allowed to like allude to William Ashbless in our own works?
Yeah.
Very good question.
Yes, if you're in the class.
Yeah.
Or Olivia, if you have been in the class.
See, I just passed. A's for everybody.
Anybody else? Any final questions before we wrap it up? Yeah.
How old is he now? He's
No,
no. I mean,
He's
like,
died.
How old is Ashbless? I think he was born in 17 something.
no, I mean, like, since you originally started writing.
Oh, we started in 1972.
Okay. So he's a year older.
And in 82, we had the 10th birthday party for him with Dean Koontz and everybody. So, okay, somebody better at math would know. If he was invented in 72,
48.
48, very good. I could have done that. But very good. So his 50th is it?
Yeah, there has to be some consideration to
Yeah.
commemorate the half
Yeah.
century of William Ashbless. That's the serious proposition. John, it looks like we are reached the end of the Ashbless Road for this evening. Thank you everybody very much for listening to this.
Yeah.